You are living in the longest war in human history. Not the kind with trenches and flags and generals whose names end up in textbooks. The kind that has no name. No monument. No victory parade. A war so old that by the time language existed to describe it, it had already been going on for thousands of years. And you are not just a descendant of the survivors. You are the weapon that won it. 10,000 years ago, something happened to our species that we have never fully recovered from. Not a disease. Not a meteor. Something we did to ourselves. And the consequences of that single shift are sitting inside your body right now, running quietly in the background of every decision you make, every fear you feel, every instinct that fires before your conscious mind has time to think. This is the story of the war between two kinds of human. And one of them lost so completely that most people don't even know it existed. For the first 290,000 years of human existence, our species was nomadic. You moved. Your group moved. You followed food, followed water, followed the seasons. You carried everything you owned. You had no address. No border. No concept of land that belonged to you rather than to the next valley over. And the groups you encountered were, roughly, your size. 10 people. 30 people. 100 at most. Violence happened. But it was personal, proportional, and limited. You couldn't hold territory you couldn't physically defend with the people standing next to you. Then, around 10,000 BCE, in the river valleys of the Fertile Crescent, something changed. People stopped moving. They planted seeds and waited for them to grow. And waiting required staying. Staying required defending. Defending required something that had never existed before in human history. A reason to kill strangers at scale. Agriculture didn't just change how humans ate. It changed what humans were willing to do to each other. Because the moment you plant a field, that field becomes the most important thing in your world. It represents months of labor. It represents your children surviving the winter. It represents everything. And the person who might take it from you stops being a stranger passing through and becomes an existential threat. The first farmers didn't just grow wheat. They grew something far more dangerous. They grew the psychology of ownership. And ownership, once it existed, demanded protection. Which demanded violence. Which demanded organization. Which demanded hierarchy. Which demanded armies. All of it growing from the same seed. But there were still people who hadn't planted anything. Who were still moving, still hunting, still living the way humans had lived for nearly 300,000 years before the first field was ever turned. And the farmers and the nomads did not coexist peacefully. The archaeological record makes that very clear. At a site called Crow Creek in South Dakota, excavated in the 1970s, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave containing nearly 500 human skeletons. Every single one of them had been scalped. Most had been dismembered. The bones dated to around 1325 CE. But the pattern they revealed was not new. The same evidence of organized, mass human violence against competing groups appears in site after site, across every continent, stretching back to the earliest agricultural settlements. The violence was not random. It was systematic. It was territorial. It was the product of a completely new kind of human relationship to the land. The farmers were not just defending fields. They were eliminating the possibility that anyone else could claim them. And slowly, over millennia, the nomads lost. Not in a single battle. Not in a war with a name. But in 10,000 years of accumulated pressure. Displacement. Starvation. Absorption. The people who moved were gradually pushed to the margins of a world that was being remade for the people who stayed. By the time written history began, the farmers had already won. Every civilization that produced writing, cities, armies, religion, law, every civilization that shaped the world you were born into, descended from the people who planted the first fields and defended them with the first organized violence in human history. Which means you descended from them too. And that inheritance is not just cultural. It is biological. The psychology of the farmer, the attachment to territory, the fear of loss, the willingness to organize violence against outsiders, the instinct to build walls and defend what is inside them. That psychology was selected for over hundreds of generations because it worked. The people who felt it most strongly survived. The people who didn't were pushed out of the gene pool by the people who did. The nomads who lost this war did not disappear entirely. Their descendants still exist. The Hadza of Tanzania. The San people of southern Africa. A handful of isolated tribes in the Amazon and the Andaman Islands. People still living roughly the way all humans lived before the first seed was ever planted. And researchers who study these groups consistently find the same things. Lower rates of depression. Lower rates of anxiety. Extraordinary social cohesion. A relationship to time, to other people, to the natural world that modern psychology describes as profoundly healthy. And a complete inability to survive contact with the civilization that defeated their ancestors. Not because they are primitive. Because the world was rebuilt around a psychology they don't share. Here is what nobody tells you. The war did not end. It just moved inside. The same territorial instinct that drove the first farmers to eliminate their nomadic competitors now runs inside every human being alive. It shows up in how you respond to people who are different. In how you protect what you have. In how quickly a group of strangers becomes an us and a them. In how easily fear of loss overrides every more sophisticated instinct you possess. You are carrying a weapon that was forged 10,000 years ago for a war that technically ended before history began. And it is still loaded. The civilization you live inside is the product of that war. Its institutions, its borders, its hierarchies, its deep structural need to define insiders and outsiders, all of it traces back to the moment the first farmer looked at the first nomad and decided that one of them had to go. You didn't choose this inheritance. Nobody asked you. But it is running in you right now. Quietly. Patiently. The way it has been running in every human being since the war that has no name began. The only difference between you and the people who fought it is that you have the option to know it is there. Whether that changes anything is the question nobody has answered yet.